we're talking about what we eat and how we value food, and for this session we welcome the Minister of Agriculture and Rural Communities, Damien O'Connor. He's going to start by discussing the policy landscape with us. I'd also welcome to the stage Tim Morris, Director of Coriolis, leading expert on New Zealand's and Australia's food industry. We also have Steve Carden, CEO of Pāmu Farms, formerly known as Landcorp. Pāmu has farmed in New Zealand for more than 130 years. And for those who went along to the welcome function on Wednesday night, the panna cotta was made from Pāmu deer milk, which is a great example of a new high-end product innovation in this space. We also have Leonie Matoe, Acting General Manager of Kaitahi. Now, Kaitahi is a local Taranaki iwi business transforming traditional Māori ingredients into contemporary food and beverage products. And the superfood smoothie drops have been on offer over the last couple of days out in the exhibition space as well. So I'll hand over to Minister O'Connor to set the context for this, and then we'll have a panel discussion. Thank you.
Kia ora tātou, and could I firstly acknowledge my fellow panellists. Can I acknowledge Honourable Henry Puna, Prime Minister of Cook Islands, Fiame Naomi Matafa, Deputy Prime Minister of Samoa, leaders from iwi, 8 iwi groups from Taranaki. It's a pleasure to be here. I see a few MPs here, to some very formidable leaders across the agribusiness sector and across industry. Thank you for the opportunity to say a few words. I understand you heard from my boss yesterday, and Megan, and a few others. Look, we are in an amazing country and an amazing region. Our economy was built on and still depends upon agriculture. And we got there through the hard work of our ancestors. And they broke down bush, built up paddocks, and grew the agriculture economy and sector to be one of the most successful and efficient in the world. And we have to acknowledge that. But the environment was effectively a slave to the economy. And whether it be in the removal of bush from steep hillsides, or perhaps just putting the effluent into the local stream, as I did when I was share milking, or just not being aware of the impact overall of our farming practices, the environment has come under pressure. That uncertainty about changes that government has clearly indicated is challenging for farmers up and down the country, and particularly in a region like this. The zero carbon bill that my colleague, the Honourable James Shaw, launched is hopefully removing some of that uncertainty. And the new national environmental standards on water will hopefully go some way to alleviate that uncertainty over water quality. We can't carry on doing things the way we have been doing and expect to get a better outcome. So I'm from the West Coast. 3 R's, raw, rugged, resilient, we like to say. We have an economy down there based on coal mining and gold mining and cutting down trees. And we've had to make a transition. We lost 1,000 coal mining jobs over the last 5 years. That's a huge hit, but we're getting on with it. While there's some grumble people down there, and we had James Shaw at a climate change forum in Blackpool on the weekend. There's an overwhelming sense of enthusiasm for a better future that is more sustainable, even from those in coal mining, because they knew it wasn't going to carry on forever. This region too is very similar. We share a bit of rainfall, we share a great farming environment, and I guess we share innovative, resilient people. I don't necessarily agree with James Cameron and what he said yesterday. I think we do have a good future in livestock farming, as long as we do it in the best way possible. Ethical practices around animal welfare, labour standards, environmental management, utilising pasture to produce the finest quality protein for the world's most discerning customers. That's the only future for New Zealand, whether you're from Taranaki, from Southland, or from the West Coast. There's a new generation coming through, probably not quickly enough into farming. I met with a group of farmers and farm professionals just before. there are some challenges, but the new generation know, because they've travelled extensively, they're interconnected with their friends all around the world, that our customers are seeking better values and different values in the food that they're purchasing. We had a program that was about doubling exports, and huge pressure was brought to bear on the environment just because we wanted to do more. Well, what we're saying as a government, we want you to get more, not just do more. And in that way, we'll have more profitable systems that allow us to relieve the pressure on the environment. We've launched a campaign in California just recently, marketing Taste Pure Nature, highlighting the attributes of pasture-fed beef in a discerning market like California. But we've missed the boat on a number of things like A2, haven't realised the full potential of organic, and so we have been slow in many areas of agriculture to take on board the international trends and signals and get on with it. That's why I appointed a primary sector council. Lane Jagers headed that. They had the task of developing a vision for New Zealand agriculture into the next 50 years. They've come up with one, Tao, well-being, a Māori term, one that could be explained to me, I'm sure, a lot better. They're out there now explaining that vision and hopefully bringing people on board so that everything we do, every dollar that we invest, is working towards that vision and a better outcome long-term for us. Kaitiakitanga. Food from people who care, for people who care. There are many, many ways that we can incorporate Māori values into our production systems that will make a unique story for each and every person selling New Zealand products around the world. Taranaki is a great place to start. And I'm sure that in the just transitions objectives of this conference, that agriculture will play a huge part in the future of this region. The Primary Sector Council is about to deliver its vision. We'll put that alongside the vision of Wakatu in the top of the South Island, a 500-year strategy for their iwi organisation. Ngāi Tahu, a 200-year. The Chinese have got a 1,000-year strategy. It's about time that we step up and look forward and understand the values that are going to drive our economies into the future. Can I just say that I'm from government, we're here to help as always. We do have a program that will help that transition in agriculture, and I'm happy to answer questions on that after my fellow colleagues have spoken. Can I just say on the issue of emissions, there's one fact that I think we should be aware of. I think some have said that New Zealand should be the best country for the world. We can only feed 40 million people, but we can help feed the world. And that's our moral imperative, I believe. A third of the food that we produce in the world is wasted. If that was a country, it would be the third biggest emitter after China and the US. That is something that we have to help with. We have systems, we have technology, we have a passion that we can share with the world to help them and help us reduce our emissions, create a better planet, and create products that the world is yearning to try, to taste, and to experience. Thank you very, very much. I can just say that it was impressive. I met with Kate Raworth, and she speaks of regenerative agriculture. That's one of many options around mixed farming models that will roll out in front of farmers up and down this country as they look to adjust their farming systems to the new world of environmental awareness, of sharp and discerning customers, and a place that we all want to live in. Kia ora. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. So we're going to have a discussion. Just one note on Slido. A couple of people are asking, or there's a suggestion online that people's questions are being deleted or censored. I've been assured by the conveners that they're not being deleted or censored. Some of them are being archived by MB, and they will be going through all of those at the end of the conference. We're putting questions to the panellists on each session that they are able to answer. So if you've got a question on land use or the future of food, then put it up now. All your other questions will be read, and MB will put responses to those questions in groups at the end of the summit. So let's get stuck into this. Minister, you talked about vision there. In a nutshell, what is your vision for where the agriculture sector needs to go as part of this transition?
Well, it has to be sustainable in every possible way, and that means have a social license to operate, be protecting the environment, but be able to offer a future for young New Zealanders that sees they can lead a good life, they can make a fair return on their efforts, and not end up trapped, as too many farmers do at the moment, in a situation of high debt, of growing compliance, of no way of a better future being in front of them. And we simply cannot allow that to continue. We have to offer a better future.
Tim, what do we mean by changing land use?
You're asking me?
Yes.
Sure. Look, farming's a funny thing. It uses an extensive amount of the land. 50% of New Zealand is farmed. That's not out of the ordinary. Ireland uses 70% of its land. The UK uses 60%. There's a fundamental question there. Can you change land use at a very fundamental level? You can, but it takes a long time. You can swap out a phone app. I watch my kids. This game's cool. That game's not cool. It's gone. You can't change land use like you can swap out a phone app. It takes sort of 20, 30 years of hard work. And it's got to be, farmers are very conservative people. So you can change land use, yes, 100%. But it's not going to happen overnight. It's challenging. And then it's not only leaving where you are, it's getting through that river to the other side. It's really easy to say, here's a great vision. It's the path through that river. And you've got to be, especially with New Zealand, 60% of what we export merchandise trade is food. And we sell it to the world and we're competitive in it. But just because I think nuts are a great idea, maybe we should stop having cows and start having nuts, doesn't mean the world wants to pay what we want to sell them for. It wants to pay what it wants to pay. So there's a lot wrapped up in that.
So tell us a little bit more then about what that process involves, however long it would take.
At the end of the day, I hate to sound macabre about it, but it's probably a generation of farmers dying. I mean, it's probably, they've got to, people over 50 struggle to change, and you've got to have new blood coming in, as the minister mentioned. You've got to have new farmers coming in. You've got to have new ideas, and more than that, you've got to have a successful farming model. We're doing a project right now for the Australian government, looking at what you do in the north of Australia with broadacre crops. It's a great idea. People have been trying for 150 years to grow broadacre crops in the north of Australia. No, still no one's got an idea. We can say, well, you might grow sesame and you might grow shea nuts, and that's great. It's got to make money economically as well. Dairy makes money today. If you look at this region around us, Taranaki, 94% of the volume that comes off the farms in this region is cow-based. 94%. Poultry, another couple of percent. Everything else, the ocean, arable crops, fruit, vegetables, processed foods, everything else you want to name is that other 3%.
Steve, is there an alternative to waiting for farmers to die?
Well, thankfully I'm just under the 50 mark, so I feel relieved about that, Tim. There is a future. I mean, it's actually a very exciting future. I think I agree with the Minister. I think farming's future is definitely brighter than its past, but it's a different future than its past. I think everyone understands that for 130 odd years, New Zealand has been fantastic at growing more meat and putting more milk per hectare of land across our farm network. We've been world beaters at that. But we've realised recently that that's come at a cost. Now, what it has done is it's created a huge amount of wealth for our country. It's created a huge amount of wealth for our farmers. And the other thing it's done is it's meant your food bills every week are much lower than they would otherwise be. The problem, of course, is that the environment has been subsidising that food production system. And we're all aware that we've reached the limits of what the environment can sustain, and we need to reverse that model quite quickly. So within Pāmu, which is a state-owned enterprise with about 125 farms all around the country, except for in Taranaki, we're trying to do three things, quite simply. The first is, if we're going to farm animals, we've got to find better ways of farming them that doesn't destroy the environment. So regenerative ag is a big focus for us. Organics is a big focus. Taking PKE out of our system has been a big focus, fewer cows. And the great thing about it is that as we're developing these systems and using new technologies, the farm staff we deal with are increasingly energized about the fact that this isn't just better for the environment, it's actually a much better farm to operate in, which means we're going to attract better people to come and work. What it does mean, though, and this gets to the second point, is we're going to produce less. And for a farmer, when you produce less, you make less money. And that's a problem in the short term. So we do need to find ways in which we can get paid more for what we produce. So organics, A2, grass-fed, woolen surfboards are innovative ways in which we can change our farm systems and find people who are prepared to pay more for the food that we produce. And then the third thing we're focused on doing is finding non-traditional ways and non-traditional products to produce on our farms. So we've set up a sheep milking business. Into Asia, we've set up a deer milking business. We're really focused on building a forestry portfolio. We're really focused on horticulture, hemp, and other arable crops, not as a replacement to the animals, but as a supplemental complementary set of outputs from our farms that sit in harmony with our animals. This is not an animals versus plant debate. They both exist and coexist really effectively together. In fact, they're better together than apart. It's just getting the balance right, and we haven't had the balance effectively up until this point.
Leonie, this is something that many people are only just getting to grips with, but this is not new for Māori, these issues, the strain on our ecosystem. What are some of the barriers that you think exist in understanding just how tight we're running to the margin? Is it partly the fact that we have such a small population and a reasonably large landmass, and we haven't been forced to confront the reality of our consumption and the way that we've been using the environment until now?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, tēnā koe, tēnā koutou e te wānui o Taranaki mo ngā koutou katoa huri no te motu. What a loaded question. But, absolutely, one of the barriers, I believe, is just acknowledging, and I mean, it's upsetting, but a little bit not surprising, really, that the indigenous agriculture systems that were in place, before the 8-wire fences were put up and before the stock arrived on our whenua, is never truly acknowledged or understood. And that is essentially the biggest challenge that we had in establishing and launching Kaitahi. Our whole company and ethos is centered around reconnecting to our indigeneity, reconnecting to our indigenous agriculture and indigenous food systems, which is understanding and learning from the old ways. But of course, using today's technologies, using the knowledge that is already put into the creation of food, but weaving those two knowledge systems together in order to create an emergent new system and an emergent new way of doing things. And that's the excitement for us with Kaitahi. It's much more than a product that incorporates native plant foods. I do believe that some of the future is most definitely plant-based, but acknowledge that goes alongside of some of our traditional animal food products. But the barrier, I believe, is just actually acknowledging that, is that there was a very strong indigenous agriculture system in place that reached the globe. And that is what Kaitahi is reconnecting with. And those are the principles, I suppose, and the values that we're carrying through our company. Acknowledge that we have this deep knowledge system that we can reinterpret, revitalize, and reconnect to today's contemporary issues.
Minister, I do not envy your job because you are the Agriculture Minister at a time and in a government that is trying to achieve change in this area. And I imagine that people come up to you in airports and on the street and tell you what they're feeling when you're out and about around the country. What are people's biggest concerns, those who work in the agriculture sector? What keeps them up at night when they see this stuff in the media?
I think it's the uncertainty, and while I've been told that disruption is going to be a commonplace into the future, I guess you've got the global dairy trade, variation in milk prices on a fortnightly basis. You've got talk from the Reserve Bank and their banks about possible interest rates going up, talk from government of new requirements around water quality standards, and now we have a zero carbon bill. So those are legitimate concerns for farmers, and that's why we need, and I say we, it's not just government, but working with industry, particularly the advisory sector, to put the options in front. And this is where it comes into alternative land use. And so we had mixed farm models in the past, and we had a bit of beef and a few sheep and a bit of dairy, and what we've done is we've ended up specialising, which gives you some economies of scale, but it makes you less resilient. And so we've got to go back and offer them opportunities. The Billion Trees program does offer opportunities to offset some of the emissions. Some of the soil types that they have within a farm are suitable for different crops that farmers may not have had to look at in the past. And so we've got to, reduce that uncertainty and show them that it's a good way forward. And there's a lot of information out there. It is sometimes confusing for farmers.
We do have a very long-standing and entrenched way of life and way of farming. I'm interested in this idea that Steve suggested, the idea that we need to produce less and generate more revenue. I mean, how does that go down in the regions when you're talking to people? Is that something that,
Well, the farmers might put up with that, but their bank manager may not. And so there's an economic reality that they face. And they're on the treadmill, many. The levels of debt are relatively high across agriculture. And because farmers sometimes make an emotive decision because they love a bit of land. And they pay a bit more than they should have, and they live in hope that the milk price might go up or the beef prices go up. And when that doesn't happen, creates incredible stress. And so we're very mindful of that at a time we're asking for a changing approach to emissions and to water quality. It's a challenging time, but I think there's a new generation that industry organisations accept that we just have to do this.
Tim, you wanted to speak to that?
I fundamentally, based on the data, disagree that New Zealand's future is about producing less. New Zealand's the similar size to the UK, it's a similar size to Italy, it's a similar size to Japan. We've just recently analysed the data. When you look at what New Zealand produces in the land use, we look like rural Wales. We look like parts of Northern Ireland or the Irish countryside. If you look at places that have been inhabited and civilized for a much longer time, you look at Italy, you look at Spain, you look at France, you look at Greece, they have a lot more arable crops, they have a lot more fruit and vegetables, and they have a lot more variance between their regions. It really helps if you've been growing grapes somewhere for 3,000 years. So I fundamentally disagree that we're going to produce less in the future. What I think is we're just doing the easy thing, which is the sort of rural Wales thing, which a lot of the immigrants that came here came from. Put some cows out on the land, and I don't think 1,000 years from now we're still just going to be wandering cows around.
So you believe rather that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we're producing the wrong stuff? In part.
Yeah, agree, 100%. Yes, I think we could be producing more. We need to. In the future, we're going to look more like France. We're going to look more like Italy, and less like Northern Ireland.
If that's the case, given what we heard yesterday about the sense of urgency around this just transition, surely then we can't afford to wait until that generation of farmers ends up 6 feet under to actually change the way that we're farming.
100% agree, and no one in their right mind would disagree. There is a sense of urgency here. We need to get going with this. The challenge is we're stuck in our ways. We're production-driven. We've got a production-driven mentality, and we've got a society that almost culturally worships pastoral agriculture. It's sort of like a belief system. We've sort of incorporated this view of 18th century, English idealist countryside. There's just cows going to wander around quietly, and the future's a challenging place. It's not going to look like that.
What's your view on that, Leonie?
Oh, yeah, I absolutely agree with you. That's sort of what I was alluding to before, is that we're unable to move out of that shape and that frame of thinking. But I believe that what we're attempting to do with Kaitahi is to draw value from these indigenous food ingredients. And, we're across a number of global food trends at the moment, and this idea of indigenous value creation, whereby our purpose of business and our purpose of enterprise is actually centered around those notions, Māori notions of vitalism, humanism and reciprocity. And in that we're able to preserve and enjoy the bounties of papatuanuku. That to us is the pure value creation. And it was great to see Kate, talk about some of these global companies, looking at the way that they're doing things, understanding how can they draw value from a number of different things. So the idea for us is to draw, a higher income population, connecting the intrinsic health benefits that are evident in our native plant foods, native superfoods we call them, but connecting them to other populations at the same time, We're developing our people, the capacities and capabilities of us to return to those ways of cultivating, tending, gathering and harvesting our traditional foods, feeding our people, reconnecting our people to those traditional foods at the same time. But yeah, drawing an economic value from that as well.
Can I just talk to this whole resistance to change thing? Because you get a very strong sense in the farming sector that those in the cities just don't believe the farmers want to change. And can I just first encourage you not to believe everything you read in the newspaper from various industry spokesmen as representative of what farmers think. There is a huge push in the farming sector to address the balance, and huge amounts of work that the farming sector and private farmers are doing to fix things. But there are some really difficult structural issues we need to confront. The first thing, which Mr. O'Connor touched on and James Shaw touched on as well, is that farmers love farming. And for multi-generational farmers have so much of their own identity tied up, not just with being a dairy farmer, but with the land that their father, grandfather, grandmother have owned for generations. It's really hard to take someone out of that context and ask them to be something else when so much of their intrinsic self-worth is attached to what they do and attached to the land that they farm. The second thing is we're a highly, highly fragmented industry. Pāmu is the largest farming company in New Zealand. We're much bigger than the next biggest farmer, and yet we only produce 1% of New Zealand pastoral output. So 75% of New Zealand farmers are mum and dad operations. And as the minister's pointed out, they're carrying a large amount of debt, and it's really complicated and hard to change farming systems. They're biological systems, and often what you're asking a farmer to do very quickly is put their entire livelihood and business at risk. And these are small businesses. And we need to be really pragmatic about the help that farmers need, with all the will in the world, to transition to a new future, give them the time to do it, but also at the same time give them clear targets and a sense of urgency and help to get underway.
So, Minister, what is your government offering the agriculture sector to do that?
Firstly, certainty, clarity over what we're hoping to achieve, and with the Primary Sector Council, hopefully giving them a vision that we can share, which gives a sense of direction and a positive outlook. Then we are working through a number of programs. Firstly, extension services. The old days of MAF, where we had a whole army of farm advisors, will not be recreated, but we do have to gather huge amounts of information from around the world and New Zealand into one place where farmers have easy access to it. Then we've got to proactively go and knock on the doors. There's a bell curve. There are some absolutely amazing farmers. Vast majority do okay, and there are some that we have to help lift up, because we are governed by the lowest common denominator. The way the world is now, whether it's in animal welfare practice or environmental management, it's the worst case that will go out around the world, and every time one of those incidents occurs, then our reputation is challenged. So we will be building and are building an extension system within MPI. We'll have a program of land use change, as I say, gathering soil information and all of that to present to farmers some of those options. And so those are the best things we can do. We're not going to dictate what they should or shouldn't do, but there will be certainty around the environmental constraints or guidelines within which they have to operate.
Tim, how do we encourage, can we encourage, and how do we encourage diversification?
I think first thing to acknowledge is that farming is changing. I mean, there's dramatic change going on in farming. In some sense, the farming revolution, the agricultural revolution kicked off the industrial revolution, freeing up labor to work in the factories. Now we're seeing the industrial revolution coming to farming. I can show you a farm in Idaho that produces, it's one farm, one owner, 22 barns, produces more milk than Taranaki. They've got, the change that's going on. I can show you a pig farm that produces, 10 times as many pigs as in New Zealand. The scale that's going into the industry. A third of farmers in New Zealand have left the industry in the last 20 years. The number of farms is going down. The neighbors are buying each other out. It's consolidating. Where does this end? You can get change. Most change, quite honestly, we've looked at quite a bit at this. If you take a case study like Marlborough. Right? It wasn't the sheep farmers sitting in Marlborough that woke up one day and said, oh, you know what? I think I'm going to start growing, world-class wine and take on the French and beat them in the UK market. It was immigrants coming into the market. It was new thinking. I think we've got to introduce that new thinking. I think New Zealand would be very differently configured in our food industry if we'd been colonized by France, or we'd been colonized by Italy, or we'd been colonized by Greece. What we make and do is not inherent in New Zealand, it's inherent in the people that came here, hence we look like rural Wales. I think it's just new thinking, new ideas. Farmers are very good. If they see something working, they'll copy it. And so it's just getting some stuff working, and people will pick it up quickly. You look at how quickly Marlborough took up wine grapes. Once something works, New Zealanders can pick it up.
Steve, how do you see this?
I agree with that. Actually, it's not that hard to plant a new crop and to change a farm system in totality. So I think, changing land use is one situation we need to deal with. Actually, what happens with the product when it leaves the farm gate is really the biggest constraint I think we have as an industry. We're really good at building 10, 15, 20-tonne dryers that process milk really cheaply into commodity products. We're not as good at developing niche products that require specialty manufacturing and process post the farm gate, and that's where most of the margin is captured between there and the consumer. So we actually need to have a really joined up bit of thinking about how we can take what's almost stranded assets in the dairy sector and use those assets now to start enabling some emerging growth sector assets.
And that speaks to the importance of R&D and innovation, and I mean the work that your company is doing, Leonie. Tell me about where did that come from? How do you harness the innovation and the brains that are already here to create new products?
Yeah, that's right. Well, for us with Kaitahi, it actually started with an external threat of seabed mining landing on our shores.
Right.
And at that time, in 2014, the iwi gathered together asking, what is our contribution to economic development in this region? So we chose to boldly, we could see the landscape of dairy and oil and gas industries dominating here. But we purposely stepped out boldly to move against that tide. Our entire model is based on these concepts of mana atua, which can be translated as the natural capital that Kate Rao was talking about this morning. Mana tangata, developing the skills and capabilities of our people to participate in enterprise and in opportunity. Mana whenua, those importance of the integrated relationships of the people and the land. And mana kai, so those things that we produce, that we make, the value-add manufacturing that we put onto these raw materials of kawakawa, kumara, and puha. And, along the way, we're discovering so much more in terms of the connection that we've made with the old people and the ancient knowledge. And I don't know if anyone knew, but there is a native species of puha that once grew prolifically along the coastline of our iwi whenua. And this native puha has very, highly available bioactive compounds, more so than other leafy greens that we've seen. So yes, taking those raw materials, but then adding value through the manufacture. And of course, we've been working with with industry partners to transform these raw materials into frozen superfood smoothie drops, which connects to that idea of people needing access to healthy foods in a convenient way. We just released our products last year, 2018, across a food show campaign. And we took out a top innovation award. And we never expected to achieve that so soon, because now it's opened doors for us to enter into supermarkets very shortly. So what started out on the face of it might look like a niche product is now the challenge for us is, how do we take that to scale? What are the technologies, skills, capabilities that we need in order to progress and grow, and at the same time holding true to those values of mana atua, mana tangata, mana whenua, mana kai.
Let's talk a little about the future of food, and then I'll take some questions from the floor. So off the back of what you've just said, we talked earlier in the day about responsiveness to consumers, and we had Fonterra on the panel yesterday, and we talked about, are we really talking about transitioning away from dairy? Are we talking about a mixed model where we retain what we've done and what we've always done as a country, and we balance that out perhaps with more plant-based products and things like that? Where do you see this going? Is it about responding more to the trends internationally that we're seeing in food?
Yeah, I think, the conscious consumer is becoming one of the strongest consumers of the market at the moment, and certainly our company ethos is appealing to that conscious consumer, purchasing foods that they know have gone through a sustainable agriculture and land management process, products that add value to a small rural community where employment is always an issue. And purchasing products that give them some physical, mental boost in some way. So definitely we are positioning ourselves to take advantage of that future. And I think that's really exciting for a small, we are just a small startup. Nowhere near as big as these guys, but we're very optimistic, and we have along the way developed the right relationships at the right time and had government support. So thank you very much, Minister, for the support that we've had along the way. But the future also for us is perhaps, again, like I said before, what are the practices of Indigenous agriculture that we can carry through to grow Kaitahi into its next phase? And maybe for us it is returning to a little of lots, small-scale agriculture that engages our people, gives our people opportunities to grow these raw materials. And of course, looking at how we can develop infrastructure, that concept of mana kai. Is it a food manufacturing or processing hub that we can also incorporate?
Steve, do you believe that, we hear a lot about the costs and the risks and the worry and the angst around this stuff. Do you think, you talked about, ordinary Kiwi farming families, they're not large companies, they're just doing their thing out there in the regions. Do they necessarily understand the opportunities that are in this space and the fact that there is actually money to be made and there are new markets to be tapped into?
I think many are aware of it, they're just unsure how they get into it. And again, it comes back to that issue about, what are the market signals they're getting? I think farmers hear three things. They hear people want to eat more plant than animal protein than they have in the past. They hear that synthetic or lab-based meats is going to become a massive disruption to our animal protein. And they hear that plants are increasingly going to be a food that helps and heals as part of our health system, as opposed to just being for nutrition. And I think a lot of them are saying, well, what do I need to do on my farm to adjust to those trends and make use of them? And I look at something like hemp, which is sort of this crop du jour at the moment, which everyone's interested in. We've got a whole lot of hemp trials underway at the moment. Hemp can be used for fibre, nutrition, medicinal purposes, oils. There's a whole range of different purposes for hemp. The problem is we don't have anything post the farm gate, once we've harvested it, do anything with it yet. And yet we have these big dairy processing facilities sitting there vacant, which just need some investment in hemp processing capabilities. And suddenly in March, when you're harvesting your hemp and a lot of your dairy production's finished, you can convert those dairy operations into hemp processing, and suddenly we can scale up the hemp industry into starting to make more of the value-added products. So I think we need to be able to create the ability for the industry and these new land uses to scale more quickly than we have. Otherwise, we just become very boutique, niche, local players and can't get into the export markets, which is ultimately what we need as an exporting country.
We've got 15 minutes for questions from the floor, and I'm going to try and fire as many of these at you as possible, so please keep your answers brief. Steve, maybe you can answer this first one. How easily can a dairy or meat farmer get high-quality advice on what lower methane or carbon farming options are best for their farm conditions?
Well, I think there's a lot of smart consultants out there. This is an area that we haven't been investing a huge amount of understanding in. But, putting a bit of a plug in for regenerative ag, which is all about actually fundamentally using your soils and biodiversity to reduce your carbon footprint and to lower your impact on the environment and increase productivity of the animal. There are hundreds of farmers now going to workshops each month looking at regen ag. You'd be amazed at the shift that's occurring in the farming sector. That advice is out there, and we just need to be not afraid to bring it from the outside in if we need to as a country.
Someone has asked, did I just hear that Pāmu is going to offer hemp-fed cow milk?
We don't allow that.
Not sure we're quite allowed to yet. No. But I mean, hemp is a crop. It should be fed to our dairy cows. It's another source of income for a dairy farmer. We have to think in a connected way about how we build our food production systems.
Let's go to this one down the bottom. Oh, no, I've already asked that. What are the views iwi have on land use by other landowners, considering the history of Taranaki? Would you like to have a crack at that?
Well, I think sort of Leanne mentioned it this morning, number of iwi in Taranaki, Ngāroru, Kaitahi in particular, very land poor. We don't have a lot of land. There wasn't a lot that was returned. And you look across the landscape in South Taranaki and yes, our lands are very much being used. Intensive dairy farming is happening at the moment. So that's why we've initiated something like Kaitahi to start to change that landscape.
Minister, this is from Roger. Would a cross-sector farming levy organisation like the UK's AHDB, instead of the current fragmentation of farming industry bodies, help to remove roadblocks to adoption of alternative and mixed land use models?
Yes. Watch this space.
Watch this space, right? Any further hints beyond that?
I think we have a number of industry good organisations all doing their bit to represent their sectors. They're levy-based. What we need is more leadership. There's a stretch there sometimes. We've got to get ahead of it and across on the basis that the land should be used in a sustainable way with multiple kind of options, not having a sector advocate strongly for their own sector and sometimes compromise the alternatives that may be better for both the land, for the water and for the farmer.
This is another good one for the Minister. Will the Minister be presenting radical change to the RMA to assist this land use that will drive lower emissions?
There are proposed changes to the RMA. Radical might be too far. That is, there'll be clear guidelines on water, on sediment, so we don't want to lose the land. And we'll be working with regional councils. I have to say that one of the biggest problems is the erratic implementation of the existing RMA without radical reform. And so if we got that right, we might be making big progress.
Tim asks a question to Steve about why farming industry bodies are so determined to stand in the way of necessary changes that many farmers want.
There's a great quote which says, if you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude. And I think for too long, we've tried to change something we just can't change, and that is that our old model of farming just wasn't working and needed to change. And now that we've recognised we can't change it, we have to change our attitude. And what I would like to see more from the industry leaders is a recognition that this actually presents a world of opportunity for us to create much better farms, much better food production systems, and much better quality food. And let's put all our energy into creating those solutions rather than trying to resist the irresistible.
Minister, there's a question from Jill who asks, and I guess this is in the context of this idea of a just transition, how can farming high quality beef for the discerning and the elite help New Zealand be part of a solution for ending worldwide starvation and planetary social injustice?
There is increasing demand for meat protein across the world as we have third world countries lifting living standards. In fact, meat protein is a good way of them living a healthier life. We have excesses, as we do across the world in all areas, but that demand will probably increase. The alternative plant-based options that are put forward, and I acknowledge what James Cameron said, that is a reality, and I think the big question for us moving forward is what does the discerning customer, the person who's environmentally conscious around the world say? Do I take this highly processed, probably GM-based product, which is plant-based and a lower impact on the environment, or do I take meat which has been produced in a natural way in a country that runs ethical systems?
I guess the spirit of the question, though, is that somebody who is starving is not buying a high-end piece of New Zealand sirloin.
No, and they can't afford to and never will.
Yes.
As I was saying, we have to help the world, help to feed the world.
Yes.
So what we've learned in terms of basic management around livestock that could be applied to make animals in Africa and India more efficient would not only reduce emissions, gross emissions possibly, but actually produce far more output and more protein for a population that needs protein.
I guess what this person is asking, though, is do we have a social responsibility? If we're saying that we're committed to a just transition and we're going to show a leadership role in this, do we have a social responsibility to shift what we're farming and how we're farming it in order to provide a larger volume of more accessible, better value, more necessary products to people who need food given that food is a major issue as part of social justice. And
We do, but we've got to, whatever we produce, we have to do in an ethical and sustainable way. And then we have to accept that we can't feed the world, and that we've got to allow and assist other production systems. So I'm not trying to avoid it, but
Didn't you just say that we could feed the world, though?
No, we can't. We can help feed the world. That is, we can help countries do it. We can't physically do it ourselves. The technology, the wisdom, what we're learning through the Global Research Alliance is working with 65 other countries on reducing methane emissions from livestock. If we can work with them and reduce the emission and allow them to continue to farm and grow their standard of living, then we're contributing positively.
Question for you, Leonie. Who is the we who is incorporating Māori values? How do we need to change the way we describe the relationship between Māori and Pākehā for genuine partnerships for just transition?
Yeah, well, everything in terms of the way that we, Māori, conduct business is centred on relationships. I hear the word kaitiakitanga bandied about, and the reconnection to these Māori values and how we can learn from that. You learn by developing meaningful relationships with us.
Bruce says, what about an immediate moratorium on land use for dairy until cows learn to behave?
That's yours.
Where should we go from this? Can you expand? I think there's a couple of people here asking, Steve, for you to expand on this concept of regenerative agriculture.
Yeah, sure. Well, for those non-farmers in the room, regenerative agriculture, as I understand it at least, is about sort of working with nature rather than against it. It's about making sure that your soils have as much carbon enrichment as possible. You're not putting on a huge amount of fertiliser, you're not putting on a huge amount of chemicals. You're planting a huge variety of pastures and crops and trees on your property to enhance the biodiversity of your farms. And you're not employing sort of reductionist siloed thinking about how you should produce food and how you should run a farm system.
I think there are tensions and change in the sense that if you look at the Netherlands is the size of Canterbury and it produces 5 times as much food as New Zealand. But when you start to go down that path and say, what does that path look like? It looks like intensification, which is a bad word in New Zealand because we've absorbed this pastoralist view of the world that everything should be low intensity. And we're finding the limits of pastoral agriculture in New Zealand. And so that's one tension to go down that path, and we're trying to find these new paths into a new future, and there's no obvious easy solutions.
Minister, I asked this question to James Shaw, knowing that he wouldn't be able to answer it, given that it's not his portfolio, it's yours. It's the most upvoted question from this summit. Will our government fund a pilot project to support farmers in fair transition from animal agriculture to livestock-free land uses?
We will be supporting, I don't know what you call a pilot, but a program of shifting to appropriate land use that might not be forcing or allowing farmers, they may choose to move from livestock into alternative land use. We'll be there to assist with all the knowledge and with all the science behind that to ensure that they have a fair chance of a viable alternative, not just go broke, and in fact be in a net positive environmental outcome, not a negative one, because moving from pasture into horticulture, you reduce the carbon in the soil. And so that can be a negative if you take whole farm system accounting on board.
So how will you do this?
So we're setting up an extension system within MPI, working in coordination with the existing network of, we haven't yet done that, we'll be gathering the information, the advisors that are around the country, some first-class advisors, but many farmers either can't afford them or can't afford them for long enough to get a comprehensive set of advice. That's what we'll be doing.
This question here,
Call it a pilot.
The world does not need meat or dairy to live. This picks up on yesterday morning's conversation. I guess the Minister is closing his eyes to what is needed. There's also a question near the top of the upvoted list. Given the decline in dairy sales globally, why is the government so scared to demand big dairy reduce their biological emissions to net carbon zero? What's your response
I'm not aware of declining dairy sales internationally.
Global dairy consumption is growing, and what the world needs and what the world wants are different things. We we trade with the world. To get all the cars and cell phones and everything that we have, we give the world dairy because that's what they want from us. And so to say that we should tell the world what it wants, they're going to tell us that we don't need our cell phones and cars.
Minister, what's your position on plant-based eating and lifestyle?
I think it's fine. I think it's the emergence of, and as I say, it has to accept the reality of genetic engineering often. If that's okay, there are a lot of people who don't see that as a positive future. Look, it's the reality that we're facing. So as producers of enough food for only 40 million, we have to work out whether there's a place for our production systems, enhance them, change them. Where does our product sit? You know, there are a lot of people out there and they want options, and plant-based protein will be one of them. And I welcome that. We shouldn't see that as a threat at all. It is an opportunity to differentiate and to improve our products.
Leonie, we've been hearing for a long time, I think the UN has been quite big on this. Every year or two it comes up in the media, eating insects. You know, there's other options as part of a diet that are being considered as we have these major international pressures on food. Are we considering the options that perhaps we should be? Are we thinking big enough on this stuff?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was fortunate to present at the New Zealand Agri-Food Week just last month in Palmerston North, and I actually presented alongside the cricket farming guy. Sorry, I can't remember his name, but yeah, phenomenal what he is doing, and he showed me what cricket farming looks like. Crickets in particular have very high protein amounts, and you know, just from that meeting and seeing what is possible, I think the opportunities really are limitless. And yeah, watch out, one of our Kaitahi smoothie blends may have some cricket protein powder in them very soon.
And I think this is why food production is so exciting, because there's this massive proliferation now of what people want, and the diversity just in the dairy space of 70 different sorts of dairy products you can get in a Whole Foods in California now, which is actually an amazing opportunity. I love what Leonie's company is doing, because it's actually taking something that's unique to New Zealand and expanding people's palates. Now, my daughter chose to be meat-free for Lent this past Easter, and it's pretty hard actually to come up with creative ways of cooking plants in lots of different ways, but people are clearly transitioning their diets to lower meat usage, and the great news is there's a growing number of plants and plant-based solutions that now people can enjoy, so you don't feel as though you're compromising from either a health or a nutrition or an enjoyment perspective.
Are we trying to have it both ways by hanging on to the way that we've done things, but also, is the messaging too mixed here for people out there who are just trying to work out what are the decisions that I should be making as farmers?
I don't think there's any one pathway to the future. I think it has to be a mix. We have to be resilient, so that means we do have to keep options, not just as a farmer. I guess a trader will do that. They won't just sell one product at every part of the food chain. I think where we've really succeeded, and in horticulture is a great example, where the farmers have been connected to the customers, where they listen to them, where they understand what they're looking for, and they go back and produce something that they want. And where we have layers and the disconnect between what producers do and what the consumers are getting, then that's when they pollute the messages and often don't allow them to get through. And I think if the farmers, you know, could get all that information on a regular basis, they would alter their farming systems, you know, to produce what people want.
Just to wrap up, 30 seconds from each of you of your key take-home that you'd like people to leave with on the future of food and the future of our land use. I'd like to go first.
Wherever possible, reconnect with Indigenous value creation.
Absolutely. I would say 2 years ago, people thought it was madness we could create woolen surfboards. 2 years ago, they thought it was madness that we could milk deer, and now we're selling it to cosmetic companies in Korea. We need to unshackle our thinking about what's possible in our farming system, and it's a bloody exciting future.
I think that we need to think differently about how we achieve this change. The real challenge is in New Zealand, we've got 6, 7 agricultural products that we produce that are over $1 billion. All of them historically have had huge government involvement in them. It's not some kind of idealistic Milton Friedman-esque market that just makes things happen. And I think if the government is serious about making some serious change in agriculture, I think we need to think differently about it and not just wait for the market to do something.
Sorry. Can I just say we have always succeeded when we have collaborated. Sometimes that collaboration has been disciplined through legislation, through regulation, zespri, dairy industry. I think we've got an amazing future And I kind of conclude with those who think they can and those who think they can't are right.
Excellent. Really, really interesting. Thank you all very much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you.
Give them a round of applause.